Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar on the Wellcome Data Prize for Mental Health. I'm Juliette Néran, and I'm the project manager at Social Finance for the Data Prize, and I'll be chairing this webinar. So for those of you who might not know Social Finance, we're a non-for-profit organization, and we partner with organizations and communities in order to develop lasting social change in the UK and globally. So to walk us through the agenda, first I'll be giving a high-level reminder of what the Data Prize is before handing over to Kate Martin and Shuranjit Singh from Wellcome and Amarnu Inai, who has been part of our youth advisory network, and they all will go through some consideration around best practice for teams in how they can incorporate lived experience in their research project. Following this, Alessandra Facio, who is Advocacy and Relationship Manager at Data for Children, and who is part of our selection panel for the prize, will go through various aspects of data ethics that teams should consider as part of their project. So we will have some dedicated time for questions to the panelists, and we'll also have time at the end for questions related to accessing the data for the project. So if you have any issues with that, you can raise these questions, and Michael Hanks, who is data scientist at Social Finance, will answer your question on this. Just a quick note on housekeeping. So we will be recording this session so that we can make the recording available for those that haven't been able to attend the webinar. And if you have any question during this webinar, you can ask them on the Q&A functionality. So you should have one button that says chat and one that says Q&A. So if you could please send your question to the Q&A functionality, and then we'll either flag this question to answer it in the dedicated Q&A section, or we'll answer it directly in the chat as we go through. If there are any questions that needs more in-depth follow-up and that we can't answer in the webinar, we will follow up on these and provide more information after the call and follow-up. So to start with, I'll give a high-level overview of the Data Prize. So if you would like more in-depth details about the prize, I would encourage you to have a look at the Wellcome website and to watch the replay of our lunch webinar that really goes into detail throughout the prize. But to give a quick overview for the session today, so the aim of this Data Prize is to support multidisciplinary teams led from South Africa and the UK to research into anxiety and/or depression in young people. So young people, it's like below 30, and help answer the question, what works, for whom, in what context, and why, in terms of intervention. And the selected team will receive funding to explore the existing data set and to develop impactful digital tools that will enable further research in active ingredients. There will be 3 phases to the Data Prize, and each of these phases will last 6 months. So, and only a subset of teams will progress from one phase to another. So in July, an initial 10 teams will be selected, and they will receive £40,000 of funding in order to undertake their work. Then we'll have 6 months. And then after the 6 months, only 5 teams will make it to the prototyping phase, where they will receive £100,000 per team. And finally, there will be 3 winning teams that will receive a share of a total of £500,000 of funding in order to scale their tool. In addition to this funding offer, we will also support teams through the Data Prize with different workshops and different support. So in regards to, for instance, data analysis, but also in how to plan lived experience involvement approach. In terms of how we'll be evaluating the proposals, so proposals will be evaluated on impact, innovation, and feasibility. And as part of this evaluation, we are going to consider in particular like how team will be looking at data ethics and how they would plan to involve lived experience of youth anxiety and depression throughout their work. So on that topic, I'll now hand over to Kate, Shranjit, and Amarno, who will go through best practice on lived experience involvement.
Brilliant, thanks Juliet. So we'll just introduce ourselves quickly first. So thanks for having us along. So my name's Kate Martin and I'm the Head of Lived Experience in Wellcome's mental health team.
Hi everyone, my name is Shranjit Singh and I'm a lived experience consultant working with Kate in Wellcome's mental health team.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Amarno. I am on the Youth Advisory Network with Social Finance and Wellcome Trust. Also been a peer researcher for the Center of Mental Health and also a student in my day-to-day.
Great, thanks. If we could just skip to the next slide, please. Great. So the three of us are just going to talk about what we mean by lived experience involvement, some examples developed in collaboration with people with lived experience and involvement in mental health science and research on some of the do's and don'ts to really help people think through how best to approach involvement throughout the project. And then also just to really think through what we mean. So giving some examples at different stages of the projects and programs. So first of all, just really thinking what we mean by lived experience. So with our lived experience advisors and consultants at Wellcome, we really understand lived experience as a form of knowledge, insight and expertise that comes from having experience of mental health challenges. And I guess the reason we think about it as knowledge and expertise is that all too often people with mental health challenges, people with lived experience are solely really seen as perhaps patients or research participants where information is sort of extracted from them or taken from them, and they are kind of the subjects or the participants in research studies. And whilst that's critical, that's really important for informing and shaping our understanding and help us learn how to sort of make changes. We know that research is done best when it's done in collaboration with people with lived experience in terms of co-designing, shaping, informing each stage of that research. And so if we see lived experience as knowledge and expertise that comes from having experiences of mental health challenges, what that means is people with lived experience can and should be involved just as any other expert is throughout the research process. So their role is not as a participant in offering their experience or their stories or their narrative about what's happened necessarily. It is about working alongside as a collaborator, really being involved at multiple stages to offer insight and expertise on the wider issues on that people experience in terms of shaping and informing the different stages of mental health research. So ultimately what we're seeing people as collaborators in terms of co-designing, shaping and being involved in multiple ways in multiple stages of the work that you're doing, not as research participants or as in offering their data. This is people shaping the projects that you'll be running. So just to kind of cover some of the expectations that I know that have been asked as part of this prize. So we're really looking at, in terms of the evaluation, we'll be really looking at how people's plans to involve people with lived experience expertise throughout, how that's meaningful, how that's done safely and ethically, and how people are involved in the governance and oversight and decision making of your project. So really making sure, I know the word meaningful involvement, those words are used a lot. I guess by meaningful, what we mean is that people are involved as experts, as collaborators, and they're involved at multiple stages. And we'll talk more about that shortly. We expect all teams to involve people with lived experience in some way in their project. We don't have predefined standards for doing that because I think that can be quite reductive. I guess what we're looking for is to understand, once you've mapped out the course of the projects that you'll be doing, to understand how people with lived experience expertise will be informing multiple stages of those projects. So that to us is one of the key definitions of something being meaningful. How are people contributing to the work, the decision making, the direction of the work that you're doing? But we do know that what that means is that how people may involve will change. Different teams will have different approaches relevant to the approach that you're taking, the context you're working in, etc. So we didn't want to be too prescriptive, but we will be really looking for how are you collaborating and involving people meaningfully in the work, the process, the plans that you've set out. Of course, this is not, people often ask the question, well, there's no primary research, so how can people be involved? I think that's just going back to my earlier point that we are seeing people as collaborators, as experts to shape the define and delivery of the project, not as people contributing their experiences as a research participant would. So this can kind of include multiple approaches, whether that's having an advisory board, whether that's having co-researchers, whatever that might look like. Very much open to any model of involvement or models or different approaches, but really making sure that the approach you choose means that people can input as meaningfully as possible at the different stages of the exploration of the data sets, of the development of the tools, etc. So on that note, I'll pause and I'll pass over to Armano.
Cool, thank you, Kate. So just a quick rundown. As you can see that the slide that we have here is a long list of do's and don'ts, but I'll just point out a few that kind of stuck out. So for point 5, about compensating or pay lived experience contributors for their involvement and build these costs into your proposal. Now, I think, as Kate had mentioned, about not extracting information and let's say given an air of exploitation, it's appropriate and it's more forward thinking when you incorporate compensating those who are giving the research, who are helping you get to where you're getting with your proposals. And that doesn't necessarily have to be remuneration. It can be in the form of vouchers, ones that are appropriate, or other means, even if it's covering travel expenses, etc. So that's number 1. I'll probably go to point number 6 as well. It says acknowledge the contribution of lived experience experts to your project by naming them on your applications and research outputs if they so wish to, because in that way they feel that their lived experience and their expertise and knowledge is acknowledged because it's helping you push your research forward. And so it doesn't feel like, the information is taken away and then you're just getting all the credit. No one wants to feel like they're just, doing a presentation and it's just one person doing it. So yeah, there's that. And then one more, give people with lived experience the opportunity to get involved in different ways, depending on what they are comfortable with. And essentially that's what Kate had mentioned before. It's about giving them the space and openness to, get more integrated with your proposal or with the research, because sometimes necessarily the one where you initially started out where participants would want to get, you think they want to get involved with is actually in other areas where they would actually excel. So there's that. If we can move on to the next slide about the don'ts. So yeah, ask people with lived experience to tell their, ask people with lived experience to tell their personal stories or background of mental illness. They may share this, but only if they would like to. Instead, ask for their opinion and expertise on various elements of your research. Just the reason being is that sometimes it can be quite stressful, as you're already aware, of sharing those types of, that type of information, and it can get quite sticky in certain situations, especially if it hasn't been resolved, even with having that gone over from that lived experience. Another thing is to not be too rigid in involvement. Many individuals contribute in different ways, as I mentioned on the previous slide, as I said, in workshops or over email. So it's giving a wide-ranging means to have the conversation and get the information that you are looking for. Yeah, and then the one final thing is that I would say, which is quite common that I see from my own experience, lived experience, stay on brand, is don't involve lived experience in small, inconsequential ways, such as only asking for their opinions after major decisions about a project have been made, or involving them only right at the end of the project when their ideas cannot be incorporated. The point speaks for itself, because as I said, no one wants to feel like when they're sharing, especially something to do with their mental health and how to improve services, that they feel like their work or their contribution is just going to be maligned or sidelined. And then as on a wider scale, it would just mean that they won't engage in further projects because they feel like they're being exploited. So I will hand over to Sharanjit. That's the end of my slides.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you, Amano, as well. So we've spoken a bit about lived experience expertise and its fundamental place in mental health research. At the beginning, Kate outlined some of the core features of lived experience involvement, that why this type of expertise is so important in the work we do. And just now, Amano's discussed some of the do's and the don'ts. And now I just want to think with everyone a bit about what lived experience involvement can look like in practice. So this isn't meant to be a checklist, but this can definitely shape or inform how your application might involve lived experience expertise. And as Kate mentioned, this isn't just something that comes in at one random point in the project, but it's something we want to see interwoven into the applications folks are putting forward. So before we start thinking, where folks might be involved across the project, it's important to consider the different types of lived experience infrastructure that we need to really put in place before we even start getting people involved in different ways. So it's thinking about, do we have, is it that we have a professional lived experience lead? Is there someone on the project team who focuses on this and solely on this? Or is it someone who is doing another role who has this part of their role or job description? Is it that we work with lived experience consultants on our projects? Is it that we have an advisory board who we kind of involve and engage with at various different times across the project itself? We can be imaginative with this, and we can think about different opportunities that are out there in terms of lived experience involvement. Furthermore, we just want to think a bit about what is the role that lived experience expertise has in the governance of our projects, and also in the safeguarding, which I know Alessandra is going to be speaking about soon as well. And something that's not written on there that I've just been thinking about is evaluation. How are we thinking or monitoring and reflecting on the lived experience involvement in our projects as well? And for me, it's a really important question, because we can do so much, but sometimes we don't reflect and see if that's been beneficial to those who have been involved, to the project more widely, and how it's impacted the work that we do. And as we mentioned, in research projects, we see lived experience expertise embedded from conception to delivery and to dissemination. So thinking a bit about project design. So how is your application shaped by lived experience expertise, as well as the various other forms of expertise that we all might have? And it's just recognizing that it's not only going to be lived experience expertise that shapes the application, but it's a very important and often excluded form of expertise that doesn't shape the different types of questions that we ask in mental health research. And within the data prize, this can extend to the development of the digital tool that is going to be proposed as well. So how is this type of expertise embedded across different parts of the application? When we're thinking a bit about analysis, deliverables, and outputs, once the project has been designed, and if different groups have been selected for different phases of the prize, how is lived experience expertise actually involved in delivering the key outputs for the prize itself? And it's just important to remember that lived experience expertise, they can bring a number of different interests, a number of different backgrounds, which can be enabled and supported to deliver these key outputs as well. So just because we might see folks as a lived experience expert doesn't mean that they don't bring expertise in, data science, in mental health research, in different specific aspects that we can enable and empower to do more within the analysis, deliverables, and outputs of the project. And then finally, just thinking a bit about reporting and dissemination. I'm sure there are going to be many, many different types of knowledge products that will emerge from these research kind of projects. And so we're thinking a bit about how lived experience expertise can be accurately and justly reflected in those knowledge products as well. So contributing to co-authoring papers, reports, publications, whether they're blogs, presentations, and it's really just identifying different kinds of dissemination routes for the results that we bring together. But importantly, as I mentioned, this isn't all just a checklist. It's a way of us providing a platform for you to get thinking and be imaginative and creative with how lived experience expertise can be embedded across the project timeline. Because everyone in the webinar today is going to be an expert in their particular area, And I think most, if not all, areas of mental health research can benefit from lived experience expertise. And so it's thinking a bit about what that might look like for us. So that was just a quick kind of rundown I had of examples of lived experience involvement across the research timeline. And on that note, I'd just love to kind of quickly turn to Amano as well, and just try and understand a bit about your experiences of research with Centre for Mental Health in the UK. You know, what did involvement look like for you, and you know, how did that go down? It'd be really interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you, Shunji. So I had started as a participant for one of the projects they was evaluating, and their project was called Shifting the Dial. So it's about highlighting Black males' mental health and what are the barriers of them engaging with both mental health institutions and wider public. So as I said, started as a participant, and then they approached me to say, oh, would you like to be a peer researcher? Because there's areas in what we're researching that we may not be able to understand, or you can provide both a lived experience and a cultural understanding to what we are researching. So I accepted, I provided that service, which they thoroughly valued. And they showed that even in the subtlest ways of saying in the email, well, thank you so much for doing this work, and we really appreciate what you're doing. And this is how what you've done is going to contribute to this wider agenda. So it was like very transparent and very streamlined then. So you could see every step. They also approached me when it came to, as Sharon D had said, about reporting and dissemination, where they made sure that my name was involved in the final report. They even said that when it came to delivering the report to other psychiatrists or etc., that I would be there for the presentation, deliver the presentation of what the research was about, my own experiences in that. They also signpost me to other opportunities as well, to other, what's the word for, symposiums with other psychologists, etc. So it's just things like that, the sort of things. And then also they're compensated for my efforts. So they paid by the hour, and yeah, and they paid well, whether it be through remuneration or through vouchers, etc. And they did that with the participants as well. And then even after that, when the project was done, they said that if you need anything, whether it be CV, etc., we'll sort you out. And it's those types of elements what we want to see in the proposals, and where you feel, where people who get involved with yourselves in your respective projects, proposals that we'll be looking out for. So I hope that answers your question.
Awesome. No, thank you so much, Amano. And I think it's a really fantastic example of how we can be kind of creative and reciprocal with lived experience involvement. You know, the thing that stuck out to me in that conversation was actually at the beginning of that Centre for Mental Health, the team, they actually said to you, we will need support with this because we can't do this given our expertise and backgrounds that we have in the team itself. And so I think there's a really important reflective piece there for mental health research more broadly, and an honest conversation really that has led to such a fantastic experience by the sounds of it. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you know, I think it's a really good example for the folks in the audience to think about how lived experience expertise can be meaningfully embedded in the applications that they're putting forward. And just wanted to turn to Kate or Juliette to see if there's anything else we wanted to cover in this section.
Nothing to add into that, so thank you both so much. But I think we've got a question I've just seen. I don't know if there's any others that have come through, but one I've just seen that says, could we give some examples of who lived experience contributors could be? I think you might have covered some of that, Sharanji, in when you were talking about the different examples of different roles that people could take. I suppose one thing for people to be conscious of is making sure that you are working with lived experience collaborators who have the relevant knowledge and expertise. So for example, if your project is looking at what works for young adults experiencing anxiety in a particular context, then you would need to kind of identify people with the relevant lived experience of having, so young adults who've experienced anxiety. So just make sure that expertise is relevant to the project and the questions that you are developing. How you engage people, as we said, there are so many different approaches you can take. So whether that's employing lived experience advisors or consultants to work alongside your teams, whether that's connecting to existing organisations where there are groups of young adults and young people with the relevant expertise who you can collaborate with through a partner organisation. Really the approach and the methodology of involving people, we're really open to a whole range because we know different approaches will work for different projects, different contexts. The main thing is really, I suppose, about reflecting on, are you engaging with young people with the relevant expertise? Do they have the expertise to kind of inform the project that you are developing? Would be my first contribution to the answer, but I don't know if Shiranjit or Amana, you wanted to come in and add on to that.
Nothing further from my side on that. It's just to be, we're here to support from a lived experience involvement perspective, but folks who are putting the applications in, you'll be sector experts in the particular, nuances of the data prize applications that you're putting forward. And so there'll be things that you see in the research processes and research cultures that we wouldn't be able to see as well. And so hopefully we can just provide that jumping off point for further thinking.
Yeah. I guess just one quick thing to add in, I suppose, is into all of this is to say, we know as a whole research community and including lived experience experts within that research community, we're all still learning about the best ways to approach lived experience involvement in different forms and different methodology, different areas of mental health science and research. And so we, I guess one of the underlying principles of this is that we're keen to learn alongside people. So we are looking for people to, of course, this will be evaluated in people's applications. We want to see people making the best effort of laying out what their lived experience involvement plans are. For successful applicants, we'll be running workshops and a whole series of kind of workshops and other ways to connect you to share practice, share ideas so that you can learn from each other, we can learn alongside you, etc. So there will be kind of support and ongoing learning as a kind of a group of successful applicants as this goes forward. Great.
Thank you very much all for this section. So feel free, if you have more questions along the rest of the webinar, feel free to ask them in the Q&A chat. I don't see any more questions for now, but we're going to have more time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to post your question, and then our panelists are going to have more time to answer at the end if you have more questions around lived experience. And for now, I'm going to hand over to Alessandra, who will go through best practices in regard to data ethics consideration that the team will need to include and consider in their project.
Thanks so much, everyone. Nice to see you all, and thank you for having me. I'm Alessandra Facio. I am the Advocacy and Relations Manager at the Data for Children Collaborative with UNICEF. So a big part of my role is really thinking about how we best embed ethics, safeguarding, and youth participation into Data for Good projects. Can we go next slide, please? So just to kind of give a bit of a brief overview of what we mean when we talk about data ethics, particularly as this is its own section in the application form. So I like to think of data ethics as one part of a larger ecosystem of things that we should be thinking about when we're embarking on data-driven projects that aim to kind of impact real people's lives. So we have the kind of legal and compliance type issues surrounding things like data access, data use, and data management. And these are incredibly important, but these should be your kind of baseline and the bedrock for you to build a project from. So data ethics, specifically in this instance, is more focusing on your motivations and your methods and your impacts. So the question kind of to prompt you to start thinking about that is, okay, we might be doing the right thing with the data and we might be doing it in the right way, but are we doing it for the right reasons? So for the project teams, this is really an opportunity for you in your application form to start reflecting on your project question itself, the design of the project that you're putting forward, and any decisions you've kind of made up until this point. thinking about the broader impacts and potential consequences of your work. So it's really just a nice critical reflection point for you and your team to look at the data you're using, look at the question you're looking to answer, and to think about whether you're doing this in a safe and responsible way. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to do a bit of a brief overview and a rundown of the kind of questions that are in the application form themselves, and to hopefully give you some prompts to take away and think about with your teams after the webinar today. I want to just kind of put out there that this is just a reflection exercise at this stage, because there's absolutely no possible way you can know all of the things that might happen and mitigate against all of the risks at this point in time. That would be an impossible task, and we're not going to, ask you to do that. So really what we'll be looking for is to show that you've considered the key ethical issues that are likely to arise throughout your project, and that you've got some strategies in place to help navigate these appropriately. So the first section focuses on ethical use of data, and the prompt question that I've got for this one is, if your project, made front page news tomorrow, how would you feel? Would you be proud of what you've done? Would you like to have your name attached to it? And that's kind of a really nice way to start thinking and start to raise anything that might get you a little bit nervous or might need some further analysis and further thinking. So a really important thing to consider at this point is the scope of your project. So when you're designing your question and the project itself, you should be able to kind of clearly bucket things into what's in the scope, given the resources and the time that you have, but also what is out of scope. And I think having clarity over that is really, really important, because it can help to focus your project question and also helps with this kind of ethical decision making along the way. So I think if you can map safely what you can achieve, what's likely to be achieved, and then happily have a list of things that maybe would be nice to have and could help bolster the project, but just aren't feasible at this stage. That's really, really useful when you're looking at the data that you want to use and how you can use that ethically. So a good way to think about it as well is, what's the minimum data I need to successfully answer the question that I'm posing? So we really want to avoid kind of data for data's sake. And I know that there's a lot of good stuff out there, and you probably could find a way to use everything if you really, really wanted to. And, it might be the case that actually you've got a good rationale for using everything that's in front of you, but having clear and obvious use cases for the specific data sets that you want to engage with and analyze throughout the project is going to help it keep ethically on track and make sure that you're using them responsibly as well. I know in kind of these data for good projects, it's really, really easy to get carried away. So it's just about thinking about what can we use safely to give us the insights that we need to answer the question that we've laid out in front of us. In terms of data sources, I know there's some that have been made available to you. So it's really a point in time to reflect on your confidence and awareness of where the data sources have come from, and whether your use of these sources aligns with the original purpose for that data being collected. So it's just one to think about as well. And the other key point I would think you should be considering at this stage is this idea of transparency. So we need to be open and transparent in our ways of working, the data we're using, why we're using it, and also any predictions or assumptions that we're making along the way. So, not to be cliche, but we have these kind of black box type projects where data goes in, output comes out, and nobody can quite see what happens in the middle. So again, with a sensitive topic such as mental health, and you've also got the challenge of it being directed at young people and children, it's really important that, to the extent that we can, we're very open and transparent and accessible about the work that we've been doing. And again, that's just another thing that helps it be safe and ethical and accessible, so people can challenge and question if that's appropriate. And if we're making predictions and assumptions at any point, we're finding new insights, we're finding new knowledge, we need to make sure we document and communicate this in a really accessible way. And that comes down to things like language and, like the guys before were saying, even the type of output that we're producing can really help with that. Next slide, please. So the second section really looks to focus on any harmful uses of your research outputs. And so the prompt here is kind of, okay, I'm going on my data project, I've done my data analysis. What's the worst that could happen? So, you know, this is a real like stop and think moment for you and your team. You might have the best intentions, but what could a bad actor or someone with bad intentions do with the outputs of your project? And what's the worst that can happen to the people that you're intending to help and benefit? So there's a couple of points on here that might be worth considering at this stage. We've already touched on kind of the language piece, so thinking about accessibility and, you know, even down to the topic being about mental health. Are we making sure we're using clinical language? We're not being colloquial, or we're not kind of having any potentially negative or stereotypical messaging in there. If we're using images and graphics and storytelling pieces, have we considered what these might portray, what messaging they might portray, and who they could put at risk as a result of that? And when we're looking at our results more generally, both kind of positive outcomes, but also things that are maybe reflecting any negatives, how could these be used to harm our intended beneficiaries or our intended audiences? And are we being considerate about how we would manage that? So again, that's just thinking about what our outputs are, how we're forming them, who's involved in that kind of dissemination and creation process, and just having a good way of documenting that is really, really useful. We need to think about who our audiences are and whether our outputs are appropriate for those various audiences. Again, thinking about assumptions and predictions, what are we saying, what's the message, is this fair? Again, you know, thinking more widely. So within your team, you might be at consensus that the messaging of your outputs is accurate and it's fair, but how could that be misconstrued or used by various groups, and have you got good mitigations in place to support that? And also thinking about what would happen if we didn't share the outputs of our work. So, you know, we might have found out some insights that are really, really portraying some negative messaging, and they could actually do more harm than good if we were to make those transparent. So how are we thinking about, you know, if that's the worst case scenario, what can we do? So again, it's just having a bit of an audit trail about the decisions you're making at this stage, and starting to think forward about the types of data you're using, the methods you're using, and how in combination they could have both positive or negative outcomes at the end of your project. Next slide, please. The kind of last section under this topic is thinking about safeguarding risks. So the guys who spoke before did an excellent job of kind of outlining some of the various types of activities we might want to engage with and the types of groups we might want to engage with. And one of the key things here is to do with safeguarding. So although primary data collection is out of scope, safeguarding is still a really relevant and important consideration, particularly to involving lived experience within your research, but also across the actual data work itself. So I guess the top line here is really that, you know, at the forefront of our minds throughout these projects, we have to remember that mental health is a sensitive subject area, and any and all conversations that we have need to be respectful of this. So in terms of involvement with people with lived experience, we obviously need a well-defined need and a use case, and we need to make sure that it's relevant and proportionate activities that we're undertaking, and that we have a good rationale for doing so. And again, just to echo the presentation before, this activity really needs to be a value add to both parties and via a suitable activity. So just again, making sure that yes, we can be creative and that's great, but it needs to be purposeful and meaningful for everyone that's involved. So something that's really key is for teams to be able to signpost and identify kind of relevant safeguarding models or methods or approaches that are applicable to the opportunities for lived experience in their project, as well as the project more broadly. So this might mean that you have more than one, depending on the types of activities that you're looking to engage in. Teams need to have a good awareness of what a safeguarding risk might look like, and how to sensitively manage this in line with those reporting procedures. So it really does need to be made clear that this is a whole team effort. It's not just the responsibility of one person, and that everyone feels confident and comfortable enough to identify and raise a safeguarding issue if it were to arise throughout the project. So when we think about safeguarding in terms of data, there's kind of a number of ways that these things might come up. So safeguarding is linked to the way we talk about our projects, so particularly when we're talking about people's data that we're using, making sure that we are sensitive to things like privacy, anonymity, we're using, appropriate language, we're keeping things confidential when we need to, just having, clear standards about those types of things. And also thinking about using different data sets and the insights that might arise if we're combining these or using them alongside each other. And just making sure that we know how to flag anything if it didn't look quite right or if it did pose a safeguarding issue. So there's hundreds of resources online that are really, really helpful for this. I'm sure lots of you are already very aware of what's out there, but it'd be really useful in your application for you to flag appropriate safeguarding measures that are relevant to the activities you're doing in your project. There's no one size fits all approach, so it's really important to take time to focus on the processes that are really relevant to your question and the outputs that you will be delivering at the end of your work. And I think that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. And so now we'll open it up for questions. So if you have any questions for Alessandra around data ethics or questions like on lived experience again, or as I mentioned earlier, like we also want to open it for question around data access, as you, in case you're facing any difficulties or have questions as you're trying to request access for the data set. We have Michael here who can help answer around this question. And just to mention, if you have any questions on data ethics, because Alessandra is part of our selection panel, she will be able to answer questions that are relevant to the broad audience, but not really team-specific type of question to avoid a conflict of interest. So feel free to post your question in the Q&A, and I see that we have one. So do people with, so that's the question for both the lived experience panel and maybe for, you have some input as well, Alessandra. Do people with lived experience expect to be paid or should be paid for their participation? Who wants to take this one? Maybe Sharanjit or Kate wants to.
I'm happy to jump in first, and then others, of course, please do add on. I think that's a really important point. I think there are ethical considerations within this. Our stance is that we, it's our sort of position that we will pay people or compensate people in the most appropriate way for their time, rather than expecting people to be asked for payment. I think there's been quite a long tradition and history in much of involvement where people have been involved in contributing a significant amount of time and expertise to projects and not being paid for it and only having expenses covered. I think if you think about the power dynamics involved, if that's the expectation that's set, it's incredibly hard as one individual to ask for payment if it's not offered. So our stance in terms of the work that we do is that all contributors should be paid or compensated appropriately for their time, and that's the expectation. How that might happen, I understand that in certain contexts or certain individual situations, there might need to be different forms of how that's approached. So again, we don't mandate how that's done for other people in their projects, but that should be, that as a basic, that there should be appropriate compensation or payment in external projects. In the work that we do in the lived experience experts that we engage with, we do set the expectation that everyone is paid for their time. But of course, that's our stance in terms of the people that we pay. For other projects, we would take a multitude of approaches as long as people are paid or recompensed for their time. But I think, just to summarize, I suppose, I think it is the responsibility of organizations to offer that and to find the best ways of doing that, not expect people to sort of ask for it.
Thanks, Kate. Alessandra, you might want to add around that?
Yeah, I would definitely echo everything that Kate said, and something that, a good way that I like to think about it is it needs to be value add both ways. So it can't just be that you as project team are gaining from, you know, other people coming in and offering their knowledge and taking their time to participate, but what are they gaining from you? And whether that is monetary compensation, whether that's compensation in other ways, it's really important to think of it as a two-way relationship and, you know, not leaning into that power dynamic. So I think if you can set up a system or a way of working where the onus isn't on those participating to have to ask, I think that's already a step in a more, you know, ethical and responsible direction. Obviously at your own discretion to what's appropriate to the activities you know, you're looking to undertake, but I think it's really important that we're not just seeing it as an add-on or, you know, something that you can get a lot out of them contributing time or effort, whatever it may be. It's really important that it's a two-way thing, and that's really made obvious and considered and reflected on when you're thinking about the appropriate way to do that.
Thank you very much, Alessandra. We have another question more on the data part. So Michael, that's going to be for you. So I'm reading the question, a hypothetical question on behalf of the data analysis team at NatSen. If a project requires special license data or secure access, what would you advise to do if the panel does not meet before the application deadline? Would a provisional letter or approval suffice?
So that question, I think it's a really good one. In terms of special license data, we completely understand that the timelines for the prize don't mean that it's not always going to be possible for teams to be able to prove that they have gained access to that special license data or secure access data. In these cases, I would say if a provisional letter of approval can be provided, that would be excellent. In other cases, I'd say if approval for access can't be shown, then I think the emphasis will be on having a project plan that can demonstrate what the fallback would be if you weren't able to gain access to that special license data. I think in most cases, and you know, in the specific, if there are cases that differ from this, then perhaps send this in as a separate question. But in most cases, I think special license data is likely to be very restricted sets of data sets, things like geographical identifiers or linked administrative data sets, like higher education files or school files, something like that. And I think the emphasis would be, okay, if you actually weren't able to get that linked data or that geographical identifier, then what would your project then still be able to do? What kind of question would you still be able to answer in the instance that you're not able to show that you would be able to gain access? And I think that would then provide the evaluation of that project would still be able to go ahead on the basis that the project wouldn't just collapse completely if after the application was submitted, actually it couldn't go ahead because access to that data was denied. Hopefully that provides some context. But if there are specific instances, then perhaps do send them in as separate questions to the prize email address.
Thanks, Michael. So I'll just wait maybe a little bit more to see that we have other questions coming up. For now, that's it. And as mentioned to Michael, in case you have any question like that you don't have on the top of your head now, but that you might have afterwards and need some follow-up, we have like a mailbox where you can ask your question, like if you have question about data access or more generally about the price, so you can follow up afterwards and ask this question. Don't know if maybe like Rosanna can put that email in the chat. That would be great. Otherwise, it's also highlighted on the Wellcome website. So if there are no more questions for now, I'll conclude our session of today by reminding you about some key dates in terms of application and key resources. So the application for the prize are open until June the 5th. And just to highlight as well, so the link to the application is on the Wellcome website. And when you start your application on the platform, it's saved automatically. So I'd encourage you to start, going on the platform to get familiar with the question, and the format, and make sure you have ample time to start your application. So after the application deadline, so we will let you know by June the 24th. That's not on the slide, but by June the 24th, we will inform you if you have been shortlisted for the pitch, the pitch stage of the selection process. Then the pitch date will be one of the date of 5th, 6th, or 7th of July. So I'd recommend that you bookmark this date to be sure to be available. And then in the next important date in the calendar, it's the 8th of August. So that will be the date where the prize, the discovery phase of the prize formally start. In case you need more information, I encourage you to go through the Wellcome website, which we also shared in the chat, where you have really like detailed description about the prize, the structure of the prize, the eligibility criteria, and also all documentation in order for you to access the data set that we mentioned. And finally, last point to mention as well is that if you're looking for a team, so if you want to apply, but you don't have a team with whom to apply, we have a dedicated Slack channel, and you can find the link of this Slack channel on the Wellcome website as well, where which is a forum basically for you to discuss the price with other applicants who may be interested, and get in touch with people who are applying and are looking also for teammates. So we have a sign up if you're already on the Slack, and you probably know that we have a sign up sheet on the Slack as well, where you can see the profile of the person who are on the Slack and what they're looking for in terms of skill set and their area of interest in terms of mental health research. And then you can, I recommend that if you're on the Slack already, that you contact people directly and have a look at this sheet to get in touch with people. So that will be it for today. I would like to thank everyone. Thank you to all the panelists and you who attended. And we are really much looking forward to receiving your application.
Julia, may I chip in with, there is one final question in the chat saying, can multiple team members access or work on the same application, which I presume is a question about the submit portal and whether that's possible. So I just wondered whether it's worth picking that one up before we close.
Can you access work? On the submit, no, on the submit platform, it's one person who needs to work on the application. You cannot share work in a shared fashion, unfortunately, on the portal. So one person will need to sign up and fill it in for the other person. There are some parts that you could probably share. For instance, when we asked for team details, that's in an Excel format, so you could work on the Excel together, and then one other person is going to submit it on the submit platform. But one person needs to create an account on the submit platform, if that's clear.
What we have also done, you can find on the Wellcome website, we've put a sort of Word doc PDF version of the questions in the application form, so that if you wanted to work collaboratively on something offline and then allocate one person to upload that into submit, that's also possible, just to make it as easy as possible for people to look through the questions as well.
Exactly. Great. Just checking, I haven't missed any question, but I think that's cover it. And yeah, and as mentioned, if you have any follow-up questions following this webinar, feel free to send us an email and we'll follow up. So thank you very much for attending, and yeah, and now I'll say it again, we look forward to receiving your application. Have a great day.